What if I told you there was once a chef so amazing they called him the king of chefs and the chef of kings? Would you believe this same chef started as a poor kid on the streets of Paris and ended up cooking for kings, queens, and even Napoleon himself? Well, that's exactly who we're talking about today. Today, we're going to learn about Marie-Antoine Carême, the man who basically invented fancy cooking as we know it. And I promise you, his story is going to blow your mind. Now, I want you to imagine being a little kid, maybe 8 or 10 years old. The year is 1792, right in the middle of the French Revolution. Things are crazy in Paris. People are hungry, angry, and scared. Little Antoine Carême was one of many children. Some folks say he was the 15th child. Others say the 25th. Can you imagine having that many brothers and sisters? His family was super poor, living in what they called a baraque, basically a shack in Paris. Now here's where it gets tough, folks. When Carême was just a little boy, his daddy abandoned him on the streets of Paris, just left him there. But you know what his father told him before he left? He said, "This will be an age of many fortunes. All that is required to make one is intelligence, and you have that." Pretty harsh, right? But that little boy didn't give up. He quickly found work as a kitchen boy at a cheap little restaurant where he worked just to have a place to sleep and food to eat. But here's where things get interesting. When he was about 15 years old, Carême caught a lucky break. He got an apprenticeship with a famous pastry chef named Sylvain Bailly. That's when his life really started to change. You see, Bailly saw something special in young Carême. He wasn't just teaching him how to make pastries. He also encouraged the boy to learn to read and write. Bailly even let him take 2 afternoons off each week to visit the library. Now that's a good teacher. And guess what Carême loved to study at the library? Architecture. He was fascinated by buildings from places like Egypt, Greece, and Italy. That's going to be important later, so remember that little detail. By the time Carême was just 19 years old, that's younger than most college students, he opened his own pastry shop in Paris. Talk about a young entrepreneur. But what really made Carême famous were his incredible sugar sculptures called pièces montées. Now, that's a fancy French term, but it basically means assembled pieces. Remember how I told you he loved architecture? Well, he started making these amazing table decorations sculpted in sugar. We're talking edible replicas of famous buildings, some as tall as 4 feet. Imagine walking into a party and seeing the Parthenon made entirely of sugar and pastry. These weren't just cakes, folks. These were works of art. And let me tell you, these fancy creations caught the attention of some pretty important people. In 1810, he designed a special cake for the wedding of Napoleon Bonaparte and his second wife, Marie Louise of Austria. How's that for a wedding cake gig? Soon, Carême was working for Charles Maurice de Talleyrand-Périgord, a super influential French diplomat. And Talleyrand gave Carême an amazing challenge: create a whole year's worth of menus without repeating a single main dish and use only what's in season. Now that's a cooking challenge. And you know what? Carême passed that test with flying colors. That success led him to cook for royalty all across Europe. Tsar Alexander died of Russia, the future King George IV of England, and many others. This poor abandoned boy was now cooking for the most powerful people in the world. Now let's talk about why Carême is so important to folks like me who cook for a living. You see, Carême didn't just make pretty food. He completely changed how people thought about cooking. Carême is considered the father of grande cuisine, or what we call haute cuisine. That's fancy French cooking with beautiful presentation and specific techniques. Before him, French cooking was more rustic and simple, but Carême made it elegant and sophisticated. One of his biggest contributions was organizing the mother sauces. He created a system of 4 basic sauces: béchamel, espagnole, velouté, and aile le méande, that chefs could use as building blocks to create countless other sauces. Just about every sauce you enjoy at a fancy restaurant today can be traced back to Carême's system. He also invented the chef's hat, the tall white hat called a toque that professional chefs wear. And he created classics like the vol au vent, Charlotte Russe, and millefeuille that are still enjoyed today. But maybe most importantly, Carême wrote down everything he knew. He published several cookbooks that became the foundation of professional cooking. His most famous work was a massive 5-volume encyclopedia called L'Art de la Cuisine Française, or The Art of French Cooking. Think about this. When Carême started cooking, there were no cooking schools, no YouTube videos, no recipe websites. By writing down his knowledge and techniques, he made it possible for other chefs to learn and carry on his traditions. Now, I have to tell you the sad part of the story. All that cooking in kitchens with coal fires and no ventilation took a terrible toll on Carême's health. His lungs were damaged from years of breathing in smoke. Carême died in Paris on January 12, 1833, when he was only about 48 years old. But even though his life was short, his influence on cooking has been enormous. Every time you see a beautiful wedding cake with multiple tiers, you're seeing Carême's influence. Every time you eat at a fancy restaurant with sauces and beautiful presentation, you're experiencing what Carême started. And every time you see a chef in a tall white hat, you can thank Carême for that too. You know, I think about Carême sometimes when I'm having a tough day in the kitchen. This guy started with nothing, abandoned on the streets as a child, and became one of the most important chefs in history. If he could overcome those challenges, I figure I can handle a busy dinner service. So there you have it. The incredible story of Marie-Antoine Carême, the king of chefs and the chef of kings. From abandoned child to culinary legend, his story reminds us that with talent, hard work, and a little bit of luck, amazing things are possible. And just remember this, a day in the kitchen beats a day of working any day.